Earnest money is a common conversation that comes up in the process of buying and selling real estate. In this video, we're going to talk about it. So, earnest money, kind of what is it? It's basically good faith. It compensates the seller for pulling their listing off the market for us to get under contract, for a buyer to get under contract. And it also shows seriousness. So if you put more earnest money down, it kind of shows how serious you are in the process of buying this house. Maybe asking, Tanner, how much is earnest money? Every market is different, but at least around here, it's common to see anywhere from like $1,000 to $2,500. That's pretty common that you would see for earnest money. And now you're asking, so okay, now I give all this money, where does it go? Well, it actually gets deposited into escrow, and the agent will do their, if you're working with an agent, the agent will do their due diligence to get that over in escrow. And there's also a deadline for you to submit your earnest money. So let's just say that you got under contract, and now in the contract you put in there that you have 5 days to deposit your earnest money. So now you have 5 days. You have a deadline to get your earnest money into escrow. Okay, and we will be talking about later what happens to that money once it's in there. And one of the first things that we're going to talk about though is contingencies and how they work in relation to earnest money. So contingencies. So if there's something that happens inside the contingency, whichever contingency it may be, for example, if the appraisal contingency, let's just say your purchase price of the house is $500,000 and the appraisal comes in at $480,000, you now have a contingency in place to where if the seller doesn't come down in price, or if there isn't a common agreement, the buyer can walk away from this contract and keep their earnest money. And that's just on the appraisal contingency. There's also inspection contingency, property disclosure contingencies. There's a bunch of them in place, but that's basically how it works in relation to keeping your earnest money that you deposit. On the flip side, if something happens outside the contingency period, there's a chance you could lose your earnest money. Let's just say that you're a week before closing the buyers, and they're just, for some reason, it's like, you know what, honey, if you're having this conversation, honey, I just don't want to buy this house anymore. Let's just back out. If you do that, and if it's outside the contingency, well, then you lose your earnest money, and that money gets deposited to the seller, basically, like we said, compensating the seller for pulling the market off X amount of days. So now we understand, it's good faith, it compensates the seller if not here. Now we understand where it goes. It gets deposited into escrow, and it comes back into closing. We're going to talk about that. So your money that you deposit into escrow at closing time, it gets credited to the buyer at closing, and now it gets put towards your down payment and closing costs. So that $2,500 that you put into escrow, it gets credited to the buyer at closing, and it's put towards your down payment and closing costs. So that's what happens to that money at closing. And the last thing important here is negotiation. So how can we use negotiations to make this work, or to have a conversation about in the process of buying and selling real estate? So the more earnest money you put down, it may also mean how more serious you are. And the flip can be true. The less earnest money you put down, could be the less serious you are. So let's just say if you're a seller and you're looking at someone deposits $500 for earnest money, well, who knows how serious maybe, because if maybe they're a week before closing, they have that cold feet, well, then now that buyer is only losing $500. Versus if the flip was true, if it's $2,500, depending on the situation for each buyer's situation, it might be tougher for them to do that, to walk away, if they have already that much invested into escrow in a contingency, down that time frame. But that's basically how earnest money works. If there's any more questions you have on earnest money, drop a comment on the video, and I'd love to provide more value to anyone that would be wondering that question. But thank you guys for watching. Have a good one. Bye.